is far more than a photographer. He is a complete journalist in every sense of the word. And what you'll see today is his presentation on the photography from Afghanistan and perhaps some other things. Something just to consider, because this is a day of journalism. Photojournalism has a particular nature, which is in order to get the picture of the moment in history, you have to be there, up close, on the spot. So this is, in many ways, the most dangerous work that is done in journalism today by Marcus and an entire crew of international correspondents who he knows well and works with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcus Yan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank the organizers for the event for facilitating this and inviting me here. So this festival is about local journalism and all this stuff. I want to first start by saying I've been a newspaper photographer most of my career, and I've had my start in Los Angeles. I've had my start in a lot of other places, but in LA, I've lived and worked in LA for like 6 years or so before I moved abroad to become a correspondent. So a lot of my methods were kind of trained and tried and true, like on the ground. I first started going to Afghanistan in 2017. And I remember the first time when I first went, it was like the year I started to travel abroad just a little more, just to get a taste of what it's like. And I remember being told by a lot of my editors that nobody cared about this war anymore. Media interest was waning, but I was determined to really go and not let what they told me affect the work. So I went once, and I kept going back over and over and over again. So Afghanistan was not a place I parachuted in last year for the first time. I was somewhat familiar with the place, the people, the geopolitics and everything. And I laid careful groundwork over the years to prepare myself, because I knew in 2021 it would be the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And with every return trip, I spent time with Afghans on the ground, because many Afghans who would speak to me about why they are frustrated with the American occupation, but also why they do not want to be governed by the Taliban, who are now the current rulers. It's a fascinating and beautiful country. It's the American occupation. On one hand, our presence there has brought so much progress for groups of, certain groups of people. Like I got to meet a 16-year-old boxer training for the Olympics. And in Afghanistan, in the first rule of the Taliban, this would not be possible at all. And, Khurshid Muhammad Mahdi, 16, trains 3 times a week at a gym at like 5 in the morning, And many young people like her, when we spoke to her in 2020, said they were adamant to stay in Afghanistan. They were going to, if push comes to shove, fight the Taliban, if they return. Many were determined to make the last stand. And that was our, assessment on the ground in 2020. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if they do make it here, maybe this will be a bloody end. But that wasn't the case. I drew on previous experiences in the country, in all my trips. But I got to see all kinds of people from all walks of life. Scenes you would never see in Afghanistan usually. A man usually never sees a woman unveiled in Afghanistan. You never almost see their hair basically, but it was a thriving. Kabul was the capital, and it was thriving, and women were allowed to be themselves, they were allowed to be business owners, they were allowed to dress freely with certain limitations, but it was starting to change for a lot of women, and this was my last glimpse of Afghanistan before the fall, basically. And we traveled far and wide in the previous reporting trips. I mean, even as far south to Kandahar, the province, where the spiritual capital of Taliban started. And from there we go around, and even in the rural south, you would see girls attending madrasas and getting education. But it's mostly headed in religious education, not so much in secular education. I would also guide and I would also fly with Afghan soldiers who have become, were becoming the forefront of America's forever war. I almost remind myself, I never almost see these soldiers again. Because we would oftentimes, every time I photograph a soldier in Afghanistan, a few months later I would get notified that they had died or they passed away or they've been killed and all that. But my role as a photojournalist is clear. Even without the story in Afghanistan, I wanted to see what everyday life looked like. So I would oftentimes, even without purpose, I would roam. I would walk around the markets. I would, go anywhere on my own. And people oftentimes, I don't travel in a large crew. I dress down. I wear a little clothes sometimes, and I go do my groceries out there. I feel somewhat accepted, and or at least blended in there. And we oftentimes, in my time in Afghanistan the last 5 years, we oftentimes avoid getting caught in terrorist attacks by minutes or hours. Here's the aftermath of an attack at Kabul University, which I missed by 5 minutes, because my driver had this wild idea to go to the top of the hill to get a sunrise photo, and we were like, all right, instead of going to the school, we were like, all right, let's drive up this hill. And earlier last year, a reporting trip in the summer gave me keen insight into the lives of many facing the Taliban onslaught. From U.S.-trained helicopter pilots in militant's crosshair to Afghan musicians, facing the ban on the vocation they loved, or young women who had never known the Taliban rule. So this is one of the stories we did, while covering, knowing that we were going to, try to cover the story as best we can. We did a story on a group of young women, young students who would call themselves Zora Orchestra. They're an all-female ensemble who are now living in exile in Portugal. And, this will play here. Oh, it doesn't play. Okay, never mind. The one thing that helped me navigate this unusual look, and I think a lot of you are probably asking, how do you do this? I wake up every month, every couple of weeks in a new time zone. I oftentimes get called, I'm the definition of a parachute journalist. I get called to go to the most unsavory places sometimes, and I always have my bags packed. I have to, most of the times on the plane, download and read up, that scene for The Matrix when Neo plugs in and before a mission and downloads Kung Fu and all that stuff. That's me. But I'm downloading information, articles about the place, history, all the current developments. That's me in the plane, just downloading before I land. But the one thing that helps me navigate this is the willingness to embrace the unknown, to practice this sense of radical open-mindedness, to know that to know that, to find comfort in the fact that I must find agency in having absolutely no agency in my surroundings. I have no control. So, and in Afghanistan, they were oftentimes we call two periods now, after Christ, before Christ, but now we call it new government, old government. And in the old government, the Taliban fighters were super elusive. It was hard to find them. And it was hard to even schedule an interview with them. It took a lot of coordination, and oftentimes you have to surrender to their parameters. So here's one where I met, Juma Bull a Taliban commander in the mountains in Kandahar. We would hike up this mountain and meet him out in the middle of nowhere. And like, I kept asking myself, I don't know if this is safe, but you know, we have no choice. So, all of you, last year was crazy because in the summer we saw the advance of the Taliban taking over province after province and after province, and I remember thinking to myself, this is it, the country is going to fall. And on sometime in mid-August, August 12th, I called an emergency meeting with my editors. I said, we need to be there now, and the country will fall. And we had a meeting, and after the meeting, they basically said, go. And within 20 minutes, I was on my way to the airport. And I just made my flight by 5 minutes, so I booked my flight on my way to the airport. And just ran out there. And I landed August 14th, and I flew into a fear-gripped Kabul. I flew into this country on a commercial flight, and as you can see, there were like about a dozen people on my Emirates flight, and I remember the flight attendant just said to me, like, going on vacation? I mean, a hired driver named Masood, who we worked with for a year, picked me up, and Masood and his family, by the way, are safe and sound. They live in Concord, California. We got them out of the country during the hasty evacuations last year. And Masood picked me up at the airport. We dropped my bags at a guest house, and I immediately rushed up to the parks to interview Afghans who had fled fighting in the surrounding provinces between government forces and Taliban forces. And as you can see, we go to these refugee camps, and men and women would tug at my shirt. People would try to grab my arm. It would just become a sin. They wanted somebody to help them. They see a foreigner and they think like, oh, he must be like an NGO worker or something. And as night fell over some of these makeshift camps, you hear a lot of scared voices. You trip over sleeping children. Sometimes I actually almost tripped over these kids here in the dark. And on August 15th, the whole city swirled into chaos, basically. As you can see, there's nowhere to move. And if you spend any time in Afghanistan, one thing is for sure you learn. There's no such thing as traffic rules in Afghanistan. Everybody drives any way they want, any direction they want. We were oftentimes, I hired my driver based on his ability to drive on the wrong side of traffic, and his willingness to break all the rules, basically. But on August 15, I realized my driver had called me in the morning and said, I cannot look anymore, I have to take care of my family. So he abandoned me, and I said, that's fine. I called a taxi, and I jumped in a taxi, and I went into Kabul looking to see what's going on. But I realized quickly I would be telling the story of a nation's swift fall. It seems predictable in retrospect that the Taliban, who was much tougher and much more resolute than any of the American-backed forces, it capitalized on fear, it controlled swaths of the country, but it was a startling reversal of fortune, and even the Taliban were shocked that they won. Even the Taliban were told us that they were shocked that they took over so easily. They thought there would be a bloody fight at the end, and we were all getting ready for a bloody fight. But at the end of August 15, I went to the top of Wazir Khan Hill where I could see the American embassy on the top of the hill, and it was like there were almost no lights left turned on, and I met a soldier who basically looks at the city below and says, "This is like a quick death," he said to me. And he said it was a hard moment for him because he's removing his uniform permanently after 10 years of service, and he was going to go home as a civilian. And so this body of work came from that period of time, and when major publications were pulling their journalists out of Afghanistan on August 15, my boss called me again because they were under pressure to pull me out too. And my director of photography, Calvin Hong, pulled me aside after a big meeting and says, "What do you want to do? Tell me." And I said, "I'm staying," and despite everybody leaving. And he says, "Great, I'll back you up." So he basically, went to bat for me against all the editors in the newsroom. And I can say, having one good boss is all you need sometimes to do the work that you need to do. So in August, life came to a standstill as the Taliban offensive reached the gates, sending it into, the gates of the Afghan capital, sending it into a panic. The president himself, President Ashraf Ghani, escaped along, and American-backed forces all melted away. Obviously, the Taliban, we all know that the Taliban swiftly took over the nation that has changed so much since its first rule 20 years ago. But what followed next were jarring, violent scenes, marking a very tragic coda to a messy and controversial 20-year occupation. The U.S. was ending its longest war. And outside, in the early days, outside of the airport was chaos, absolute chaos. Tens of thousands of Afghans would mob the airport. I'm sure you remember the pictures of the C-17 airplane taking off with Afghans. I tried to get in that day, but there was just too much gunfire, and I was with a taxi driver who didn't feel very good about it. So my rule is if one person in your team doesn't feel good about it, everybody turns around. Like, there's no questions asked. I'm not going to put anybody, make anybody do anything they don't want to do. So I returned the next day. I found a driver. His name was Zabi, and he was tall, he was calm, he was collected. He obviously knew how to drive against traffic, and he drove me all the way to the front of the airport, parked his car illegally in front, and just watched me do my work. And here, you can see, so many Afghans were desperate for a place on evacuation flights. People were trying to climb in, they were trying to climb walls, they were trying to get past soldiers. For days, this daily gauntlet of checkpoints facing guards from the government, but as well as the Taliban, who would basically threaten to shoot civilians, whip them with sticks, whips, rifle butts. When all else fails, this is what you get. And it's funny because in its nearly 2-decade fight with the U.S., the Taliban worked at every turn to undermine the Afghan government. And they derided its leaders as corrupt stooges, whose force could never really protect its citizens from the Taliban's ferocious attacks. But now that the Taliban are now in charge, this power comes with a very daunting challenge for them, and it's playing out right now. Is that they've got to convince the Afghans themselves that, many of them with bitter memories of the past, that they are the new sheriffs in town and they can police and keep them safe. And this is what we're seeing play out in today's current scenario. But there's more scenes around the airport where when the children were made the crouch in the heat, oftentimes not even going into the airport. It's very dehumanizing watching this and then photographing all this. This was 24 hours before the deadly terrorist attack at Abbey Gate that killed all those people. And there were other things going on. There were anti-Taliban protesters who aren't very active anymore these days. The Taliban have found a way to squash freedom of speech, so a lot of people don't show up for protests as much, partly because they show up to their homes and they take their families away and threaten them. And when the Taliban secured its grip of the city, there were other dangers, and one of the main dangers then and even today is the Islamic State of, we call them ISIS-K, basically, Islamic State of Khorasan. And on the 26th, there was an Islamic State suicide bomb which slipped into the hordes of people getting into the airport with a backpack or more. We don't know how many backpacks, but he detonated his vest or his bag, and the blast ripped through the crowds of Afghans and foreign nationals. At least 170 civilians were killed, in addition to at least 13 U.S. service personnel. 200 more were wounded. It was just chaos. I mean, I heard the blast myself. I was in Kabul on a back of a pickup truck, driving around with police officers. And this explosion last year really complicated an already nightmarish airlift before the U.S. deadline to remove everybody from the country. And on this night, I remember I went to the hospital after the terrorist attack, and I watched these two boys sobbing in the dark. And I stood there in the dark just watching them, and I just took this picture, and I remember I wrote in my notes, and I tweeted it too. The cacophony of Kabul after tonight's horrific bombings, the roar of jet engines, whirling rotor blades, sporadic gunfire at different volumes, hum of the generator, the buzz of mosquitoes, and the silence of the darkness. And day after day while we were there, in my time there, I spent 2 months covering the fall of Afghanistan, I would see this. People would go through any length to get into the airport. This is not just floodwater here, this is sewer water. There's like feces floating around in here. And people would just like go through this to get through to the airport. They would do anything. And it's like, it's crazy to watch all this. And the Taliban, are coming into a city that is intact. 20 years ago, they arrived into Kabul, and it was like Stone Ages, right? They were inheriting a city that was destroyed by civil war, but now they are coming in with a city that has internet, that has 5G, 4G, and electricity, fancy food, their version of KFC, Kennedy Fried Chicken. So they're inheriting a city that's built by us with our money and all that stuff, and they don't want to do much except maintain it now. So I met Dawood Sultanzoy, the guy in the suit. He's actually from Los Angeles. He's a commercial pilot who became the mayor of Afghanistan, and he decided to stay behind because he felt like his duty was to help, at least help with the transition, so that the people who were still living in Kabul could, could live in a city that wasn't going to fall apart, and he was going to help train and pass on his knowledge as a civil administrator. And while the Taliban rushed to commandeer the government, protests began all over the places last year because people feared it would be a return to the harsh interpretation of the Islamic law, and it is. I mean, they are extremists, and they have an extremist interpretation of Islam, and it would mean that arrest without any reason. I mean, I watched them arrest a man here, and they pull out a knife from their own pockets and put it in front of him. Look, we arrested him with this knife that he has. And I was like, that's from your pocket, and they don't care. And everywhere you went last year, and even today, there's always this look on people's faces when a Taliban fighter goes by them. There's a look of fear, and I remember riding in the back of a truck, and I would see people's faces looking at the Taliban because nobody's really seen them for many, many years. People who are living in big cities don't get to get a glimpse of them. So it's like seeing almost like seeing Bigfoot for them. And and the U.S.'s response basically to the terrorist attack was to launch a drone strike on I think the 28th. I think they launched a drone strike on what they thought were Islamic keynotes, but actually it turned out to be they had killed 10 civilians, basically, 7 of them children from the Afghani family. And I remember arriving to the scene. We were one of the first Western journalists to arrive, and I had experience already working with airstrikes in the aftermath of airstrikes in U.S. coalition-led wars. And the first thing I asked to my compadre and I improvised, was to ask for a shovel. And I immediately started digging in the wreckage here to the left. I found the point of contact, started digging in, and I'm no expert on this kind of stuff, like DOD, explosives and all that, but I just wanted to see what it was. I didn't know if there was we needed to prove that it was a drone strike and not a suicide bomb or something, a grenade or something. And immediately, within a few minutes, I was able to unearth orange metal components with markings, serial numbers, and all that stuff, and we proved that it was the pneumatic accumulator of the U.S. Hellfire missile from a drone. And then from there, we were able to publish a report with absolute certainty, yeah, this is a drone strike. I made this picture it was one of the most difficult pictures to make because there were tens of thousands of people around me, and I had to oftentimes roam Afghanistan without my cameras hanging out. I put it in a little satchel that I travel with. I call it my little Jack Bauer satchel, like I hide everything in there. As soon as I pull out my camera, I think this was like one of 3 pictures I was able to take before like a mob of people just like swarmed me, surrounded me, because they all showed me their documents, they were showing me their visas, they were like, can you get us into the airport, can you get us out, can you like get us to the US, somewhere safe, and I'm just like, I'm just a journalist, I really don't know what to do beyond this, like, you know, taking a picture and like putting your stories out there. And quickly, within hours after that drone strike, we were already at the funeral. Afghanistan has a culture. It must do the funeral must always take place in less than 24 hours. So every time there's a death, you know with absolute certainty that the funeral immediately. And we were, I think, one of maybe the only Western journalists there that day. And I remember I immediately went to the Afghani family, like shook their hand, apologized, made myself really small. I mean, because there were 10 caskets in front of me, 7 of them little caskets. And even as they were mourning, while they were mourning, and for this picture, what was happening here was that the F-18s were doing a really low flyby. And they were all reminded in their moment of grief that, you know, that there was still a threat above them. And one of the biggest, biggest losers from this fall, this collapse of the nation, are the women. I know this lady, Laila Haidari. She was an entrepreneur, pioneer, philanthropist. She started a restaurant called Taj Begum, and which was like the Paris of Kabul, we call it. But when men and women can go on dates there, they read poetry to each other. They sometimes hold hands. It's very cute. I go there to work on my laptop sometimes. And she uses all that money from the cafe that she started, and she runs a rehab center for drug addicts. And she would rehab them and then give them jobs in her cafe. So like it was like a cycle. Like it was very interesting. And the Taliban had obviously forced her to shut down Taj Begum, the cafe. And I was there the day she was visiting, and it was like a coincidence. And she took a tour. She wanted to see the place for what it is for the last time. You know, her heart and soul had poured into this place, this beacon of hope in Kabul. And she stood by this window sobbing for a while, you know. And it was a fulcrum Kabul cultural life for a lot of us, and including a lot of, Afghans. She said it was, I quote her, it was where women with all their wounds could come and speak with us and speak with each other. It gave people their lives back. It touched so many people, say Haidari. Taj Begum wasn't just a restaurant or a business to me, she said. It was like a cinema, a theater, a place where men and women could sing together. I just came back from Afghanistan district, and I actually just saw Laila again. Laila is still in Afghanistan. She refused to leave. She has plenty of powerful friends who've offered her visas to go to America, go to Australia, Germany, but she felt like she was going to abandon people. So she stayed, and now she's starting up a new organization to teach women how to vocational skills, how to sew, how to make jewelry, how to use computers, learn English, because she felt like they need a way to make money. And if schools aren't going to do that, she's going to do that. Obviously, the school is in an undisclosed location because the Taliban are trying to shut down, and I had to go a certain time of the day and not be followed by car and all that. And the economy has gone into a dismal tailspin, basically. Everybody is selling their stuff. Like, this is a street out in West Kabul, and you can see everybody brought everything they own out of the street to sell it because they had no money. There was because of the sanctions, there was almost no way to send money there. You can Western Union money, but they can only take out about less than $200 a day. And that is on the day they have money to give you, like in Afghani, basically.
So people are really struggling. There's enough food in Afghanistan. There is enough supply and resources. There just isn't enough money to buy food. So a lot of people are struggling in that sense, and I think the World Food Program has told me that like there will be an impending famine and a crisis here, humanitarian crisis, because there just isn't enough money. If you go to the malnutrition wards, you'll see more and more children getting admitted just because of that. And I thought this was a fun, interesting picture because I found a gate at the airport where a three-letter agency, American agency, used to get into the airport. And I spoke to the Taliban fighters there, and they would guard this gate, and you could see the C-17 above taking off. And I thought it was interesting that 20 years ago this picture was not possible because the Taliban fighter was using an iPhone to take a picture of the C-17, and they went bye-bye. And one of the most surreal moments came to head, Afghanistan for me when I met this gentleman here, Khalil Rahman Haqqani, a senior member of the Haqqani network, after he delivered his sermon on the first Friday prayer after the Taliban took over. His people just pulled me in the back of my neck and pulled me into a back room, and they were like, Khalil Haqqani would like to see you. And while I was talking to him, I Googled him, and I realized there was this website, it was I think a government website that says, Khalil Haqqani, wanted dead or alive, $5 million. And I looked around and I was like, $1, $2, $3, $4. I was like, oh my God, what am I thinking? But it's crazy, this guy down in government, this guy, a wanted U.S. terrorist, is in government. There was enough bounty in the current Taliban-run government to fund the city itself. So the joke is that they turn themselves in, they will just be able to fund everything. So one of the more interesting things that came about, the peak, the highlight of the whole event came to a head when the last U.S. plane left. And at the stroke of midnight, I followed the fighters from the Fateh's walking. They stormed into the Hamid Karzai International Airport. We were the only Western journalists to go be in the airport that night. We stormed in with them. And I watched, I couldn't tell the difference between them and the Afghan fighters. They were wearing like American-made uniforms, vanishing, M4s and M16s and, Oakley glasses, mechanics glove, combat shoes and all that stuff. But it was very interesting. It was just coming to a head. The whole war was coming to a head. And even though the Taliban had insisted that they were now more tolerant, in the beginning that's what their selling point was, an event sometimes in September made it clear that they weren't. They had tortured and detained these two journalists for an investigative newspaper called Etalat Roz. Their only crime, their only offense here was that they were covering a women's rights rally. And they were arrested, and they were tortured, and they were beaten in detention. And this is right after they got out. And it was, an important sign of things to come for this new Islamic emirate. So one of the things we tried doing differently, photojournalism itself is all about photography, but I was basically live tweeting events and pictures as I went on. Every time somebody said something to me, instead of writing it down in my notebook, I just tweeted it out. Using Twitter as my notepad. After when I would go back to write a longer essay, I would just go back to my Twitter timeline and find all my notes there, basically all my tweets. And this is how things were playing out online. And there's a way to keep our readers informed and engaged. And I found this method very captivating, and I kept doing it afterwards. As you can see, I use Instagram story as much as possible. I don't know if this is playing sound, but it's playing on the computer. Or you can see, even going to the airport videos, then it's all being played out online. It's not just on our website, but I saw a huge uptick in my viewership on social media. I've never seen numbers like that before. Tens of thousands of people were just tuning in, watch these videos as we post them. But that's just like how the sausage is made. And one of the things I would end with this project, one of these projects here, that one of the things we did, and I'm most proud of, is that as my time was ending in Afghanistan last year, I wanted to follow up on the idea that women were the biggest losers in this whole fall and collapse. And we launched into a project where we interviewed about a dozen women basically, and we came up. It's basically their testimony about what life would be like and what life was like, and we all spoke about what they had lost and what they think life would look like if they stayed. And actually, a lot of them have left since. And one of the biggest challenges of this project was not to reveal them if they didn't want to be revealed. So a lot of them didn't want to show their faces. So we had to find different creative ways, basically, to photograph them. It became like a portrait series. So, Lida here is a 27-year-old Afghan policewoman, who herself thought the most terrifying moments of her life was was behind her. She was badly injured in a roadside bomb attack in a line video years ago. And so most of her face is scarred with burn marks and everything, so I couldn't really photograph her because she'd be very identifiable. She was one of the people that made me realize how dangerous this is, because we were coordinating for days to try to meet her. We met her at a safe house, and then she immediately in front of me, snapped her SIM card, broke her phone, changed phones and all that, and I was like, wow, this is serious, that they were really tracking her. The Taliban were trying to get her because they believe, she said, they believed that she still had guns, she had, government equipment and all that stuff, so they were coming for her. Nahir is part of the Hazara ethnic minority that has always been historically persecuted by the Taliban. So she knows all too well, in her home province of Daikuni, that she would be identified and immediately sought out. So she really fled to Kabul, hid in a safe house with her child, and was looking for an exit or an evacuation afterwards. And some people want to be identified. Some of you might recognize her. This is Mahbouba Siraj, a very, very notable Afghan women's rights activist who was not afraid. And she stayed behind. And the Taliban actually had commandeered her house and is now and are living on her compound outside her house, but they're not moving in, they're just staying outside for her protection. Sakina here is a 21-year-old who, with $12, had a dream of becoming an entrepreneur. So she started a Bookshare space library where people come study, learn stuff, and it became a booming business. But during the fall, all that came to an end, and she came to me one day and she said to me, Mr. Marcus, I have a visa to leave the country. And I said, that's great, you should go. But she had a dilemma, she told me, that the man who helped her get this visa would only give her this visa if she married him. So she didn't know what to do. Should I marry him? Should I go against my heart? Should I, and I told her, I can't really make that decision for you. This is up to you. And so she basically said, have to choose, leave Afghanistan, go to safety, get married to a man she does not love, or stay. I ended up following up with her this last couple of months. She's still there. She stayed. She chose to stay. Sahar here, and I'm over that. Sahar here didn't lose her job when the Taliban came over. She is a manager of a big, business, basically. But something has changed when the Taliban came. She has to pretend that a man is in charge and doing her work as a manager. So she moved her office up to the third floor closet and is running the entire business up there in the closet. While, her colleague is pretending to be the boss in charge and the Taliban makes surprise visits. So there were so many other stories like this, and this was the last thing, one of the few things we did, and I'm most proud of during our time there, that we were able to meet some of these women and really speak to them, and they were open and candid about it, and were telling us what they could lose and what they will lose in the new world. And some of them I followed up with, and most of them are gone, most of them have left, thankfully, but some of them have chosen to stay behind. So what does life look like now? I mean, I've only got a few more pictures to show you, but this is September 11th last year. To mark 9/11, I didn't know where else to go. I went to the city amusement park, and I saw the Taliban on the swings, like playing gleefully like children. And I remember to myself, this is an odd, surreal scene. And on my way out of Afghanistan last year, I spoke to the family of one of the members of the family of the drone strike victims, who basically told us, like, nobody's called us to apologize, nobody's called us to arrange anything, nobody's even told us anything. So we did a follow-up story that prompted the U.S. to come out and acknowledge that they will help the family evacuate and there will be reparations. So the family is now in transit. They're waiting in Doha for a connecting flight to the U.S. basically, and half the family is still in Afghanistan, still waiting to be evacuated. It's been a slow process. And today, since the economy is all falling apart, I would meet so many people. This gentleman right here I met, who's from Bamiyan province, was a shopkeeper once, whose business fell apart and had no more job, has to work this like intense labor's job to shovel coal so that he can sell it to Pakistan. And it's not easy. They make about 200 Afghans a day. 200 Afghanis a day is about equivalent to about $2 or so. Like, that's all they're surviving on. It's insane. Like, that's how bad things are going in. And obviously there was a school bombing that killed a lot of Hazara students, and this was basically like one of the things that protests only exist in like a span of a few minutes. They protested literally for a few minutes before the intelligence service came up with like 7 to 8 pickup convoy trucks to basically whip them and corral them and push them away and follow them home. I myself got like rifle butted a few times and had to run away. And women are trying very hard, even with the education ban, to get their education in. There's a ban from 6th grade to 12th grade, but the ones who are past 12th grade now have to take their SAT equivalents. So I went visiting some of these private learning centers so that Nina here could go to medical school one day and become a doctor and serve her people in Afghanistan. And I learned one thing about Afghanistan is that like life isn't really about quickly climbing to the top of a mountain. My time doing this job, coming to Afghanistan, has taught me like you really must really take in life to full stride, make a lot of mistakes, step forward. We've made a lot of mistakes in our coverage in Afghanistan, and I rotated. And I had to learn all this, and it's been really, really hard. And Afghanistan I have to say, Afghanistan ended my life about 12 years ago as a photojournalist, when I worked on a multimedia story about a single father returning home from the war in Afghanistan and the cost his children bore. That work is now part of a Netflix movie called Father, Soldier, Son. But I realized everything I've learned along the way of my career as a newspaper photographer in Seattle, New York, LA, has taught me everything I needed to know that led up to this moment and led me all the way back to Afghanistan last year. So thank you very much.
Marcus, thank you so much. Really compelling and beautiful work. We're pressed for time, so we're not going to have time for. Oh, we can do 2 questions. Good. Okay. And I don't know if we caught part of Marcus's story. Do you remember after the terrorist bombing at the airport, there was the U.S. drone strike that was intended to target one of somebody who was affiliated with the bombers. And what happened there was Marcus got to that family home, and as he described, dug through the dirt and found the evidence of the drone strike. And later the U.S. admitted, oh my God, we killed an innocent family. So really amazing about your work. Okay, so we have time for 2 questions. Yeah, way over here. Okay, here comes the microphone.
How do you balance your sadness in covering these events with shining a light?
That's a good question. A lot of people ask me that. Fortunately, I don't drink, so I'm not an alcoholic, and not that much silly stuff. I've been since the fall of Afghanistan, since coming here, I forced put myself through a regimen of therapy. I've forced myself to do weekly sessions with a counselor to talk about to understand myself better, but really just to get in the habit of addressing mental health now. It's not going to change anything overnight, but it's drop by drop, trickle by trickle, something will I'll learn something about myself. I compartmentalize. I've learned how to compartmentalize very, very well for this job. Coming out here, I'll just pack it in a box, brush it aside, focus on the task at hand. And I've learned this from a correspondent friend of mine from CNN, Pulitzer Prize, who told me the trick about compartmentalizing is to never bury that box. You put it in a box, leave it on your shelf in your mental space, but never put it away. Know that it's always there, and you always have to pick up that box and address it. So make the time to stare at a wall, go for a walk, talk to the people you love, and really address this stuff. But that's how I balance it, which is not a very interesting way of doing it. I mean, I wish I had a more savvy way, do drugs and drink lots of booze, but no, I don't.
Okay, one last question. Can we get a mic?
Did you ever experience any, did the Taliban soldiers that you photographed, how did they react to you photographing them? Did they allow you to take the pictures, or was there any resistance? How did you deal with that?
It's a mixed bag with the Taliban. Sometimes they don't allow, sometimes they're really mean about it. Sometimes they're very standoffish, and oftentimes I just, when somebody says no, you go to the next person, you go to the next person, you go to the next person, until somebody says yes. I'm lucky in a sense, last year, the Taliban, most of them hail from provinces in rural areas. They've never seen a big city. It almost was watching, the movie Crocodile Dundee, times 1,000. They've never even seen a bathroom or the toilets that flush, So they were not even sure what to do with photographers. They were all just using smartphones, and they were all learning this idea of self-image. So some of them were standoffish. The old ones were really standoffish. I mean, they were not going to let people photograph them doing things. I mean, I got really roughed up last year because I photographed a protest where the Taliban fighter pointed a gun at the protester, and the Taliban commander came from behind me and just started whacking me in the head a few times until I was down on the ground, and gripping his Kalashnikov and all that, and I had to tell him I'm impressed, but they didn't stop. So it depends. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes you meet really friendly ones who speak English, but then you have to know these are all trained killers. You look them in the eye, you know they're killed, right? So they're not your friend, but you're there to do a job. So I remind myself if they say no, they're rough, they're mean about it, then move on, find the next one. But yeah, it's a mixed bag. It depends. Anybody else?
Okay, last question.
Your friend Clarissa Ward did a compelling piece about how she, at the airport, when people were going out, she stayed with the CNN Afghan team because she was afraid of what might happen to them. Did you grow that sort of friendship with the Afghans with whom you worked, your fixers, your drivers, so?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I trust the people I rely on most on are the drivers. I'm good friends with my drivers. I keep in touch with them. The driver that abandoned me on day one is now in Carmel, California. We are lawyers that help them apply a P2 visa, got them out of the country. My driver that I work with now refused to leave, and he's still there. But he was a driver for Western media since the first Taliban move. He was working in 2001 as a driver for a fellow friend of mine. So it really, as I've become really close to them, I understand that they also understand they have a role to play sometimes. So some of the translators I work with are still there, but not everybody wants to continue doing this just because of the threat it poses to their families.
Do you remain in contact with them?
I do. I mean, I have to. I mean, like, you know, it's vital, and on top of that, it's just being human. I mean, you just want to see how they're doing, you know. So I'm in touch with all the translators I've worked with, unless they like changed numbers or something like disappeared. But almost everybody, half the people have gone out and left. So half the translators I've worked with are now here in the US or in Europe, basically. So, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, thank you so much.